There exists a silent violence you commit against yourself every single day. And the most devastating part is that you've been trained to call it virtue. You've been conditioned to believe that your willingness to bleed for others makes you noble, that your capacity to absorb endless pain somehow elevates your humanity. But let me shatter this illusion with a truth that will disturb you to your core. The people draining your life force aren't doing it because they're lost or broken. They're doing it because you've taught them that your boundaries are negotiable, that your energy is expendable, and that your soul is a renewable resource they can harvest without consequence. 5 centuries ago, a man who understood power in its rawest form looked at human nature without the rose-colored glasses of morality and observed something that civilization has spent generations trying to suppress. He recognized that within every social circle, every family structure, every workplace, there exist certain individuals who operate as black holes, entities that consume light without ever producing any of their own. These aren't people going through temporary hardship. These are architects of perpetual dysfunction who have discovered that chaos is profitable, that helplessness is currency, and that your compassion is the door through which they will enter and systematically dismantle everything you've built. Right now, as you hear these words, someone's face is appearing in your mind. You feel the weight of their expectations pressing against your chest. You remember the last conversation, the last crisis, the last time you sacrificed your own well-being to prevent their inevitable collapse. And here's what terrifies you most. You're starting to realize that your help hasn't helped, your sacrifice hasn't saved them, and your love hasn't transformed them. Instead, you've become a character in their endless drama, a supporting actor in a tragedy that never reaches resolution, because resolution would mean they'd have to take responsibility for the script they keep writing. If you enjoy stories like this, consider subscribing. Most people who watch aren't subscribed yet. Before we examine the specific archetypes of those who will consume your existence, we need to understand the psychological machinery that keeps you trapped in this destructive pattern. The compulsion to rescue others isn't born from strength. It emerges from a wound. Somewhere in your development, you internalize the belief that your value is determined by your usefulness to others, that love must be earned through service, and that to say no is to commit an unforgivable act of abandonment. This conditioning runs so deep that you've built your entire identity around being the person who shows up, who sacrifices, who carries burdens that were never meant to be yours. The strategist from Renaissance Italy, who advised rulers on maintaining power, understood something about human dynamics that modern psychology is only beginning to articulate. Resources are finite, and the distribution of those resources determines who survives and who perishes. When you invest your time, energy, emotional bandwidth, and financial resources into individuals who are fundamentally committed to their own destruction, you're not engaging in an act of compassion. You're participating in a mutual suicide pact where you'll reach the bottom first because you're carrying their weight in addition to your own. Think of your life as a vessel traveling through dangerous waters. This vessel has limited capacity, limited fuel, and limited structural integrity. Every person you bring aboard affects the ship's ability to navigate storms, avoid hazards, and reach its destination. If you fill your vessel with individuals who punch holes in the hull, who consume supplies without contributing to navigation, who create conflicts that distract from the journey, the ship doesn't become more compassionate or more inclusive. It simply sinks faster. And when it goes under, everyone drowns, including the innocent passengers who deserved safe passage, including yourself. This is the concept that most people find uncomfortable to acknowledge. Selective investment isn't cruelty, it's survival mathematics. The healer who treats every patient without discrimination ends up infected with every disease. The fortress that opens its gates to every traveler ends up occupied by enemies. The heart that loves without discernment ends up shattered beyond repair. The people who will drain you have developed sophisticated strategies to bypass your defenses. They've learned to weaponize your empathy, to trigger your guilt, to activate your savior complex with precision. They know exactly which words will make you question your boundaries, which stories will make you override your intuition, which crises will make you abandon your own needs to attend to theirs. And the most insidious part of this dynamic is that they've convinced you that your exhaustion is evidence of your goodness, that your suffering is proof of your moral superiority, that your willingness to be destroyed is what separates you from those who are selfish or cold. But this is a lie that benefits only those who feed on your depletion. Here's what you need to understand. When you rescue someone from the natural consequences of their choices, you're not saving them. You're stealing their opportunity to learn. Every time you cushion their fall, you extend the distance they'll eventually have to travel to reach rock bottom. And rock bottom, as uncomfortable as it is to acknowledge, is often the only teacher powerful enough to break through the delusion. It's the place where excuses stop working, where manipulation loses its power, where the mirror becomes unavoidable. When you intervene, you become an obstacle to their evolution. You pause the lesson. You give them just enough support to continue the destructive pattern while avoiding the pain that would force transformation. Your kindness, paradoxically, becomes the mechanism that keeps them sick. The question you're avoiding is this: are you helping them, or are you helping yourself feel needed? Because what you're about to discover will force you to confront the possibility that your generosity has nothing to do with their well-being, and everything to do with your addiction to being indispensable. The first category of person you must learn to abandon is the individual who exists in perpetual catastrophe. This is someone whose life resembles a natural disaster film where the climax never arrives, because each crisis seamlessly transitions into the next. When you first encounter them, your heart responds with genuine concern. The sheer volume of misfortune that seems to follow them appears cosmically unfair. They lose employment opportunities with suspicious frequency. Their relationships implode with predictable regularity. Their financial situations deteriorate despite apparent income. Their health crises multiply. Their legal troubles compound. And they present each situation with such convincing desperation that you cannot help but extend your hand. But here's what the Renaissance political philosopher observed that you need to integrate. Misfortune isn't randomly distributed. It clusters around certain individuals not because the universe has targeted them, but because they are generating it through consistent patterns of poor judgment, impulsive decision-making, and refusal to learn from experience. Watch the pattern carefully. When you help them escape one crisis, does their behavior change? Do they implement systems to prevent recurrence? Do they demonstrate gratitude through transformation? Or do they simply reset the timer until the next emergency? The chronically catastrophic individual isn't a victim of circumstance. They're an addict to chaos. Chaos provides them with constant drama, which generates attention. Chaos absolves them of responsibility because victims aren't expected to have agency. Chaos creates urgency, which pressures others into helping without deliberation. They've discovered that crisis is a form of currency that purchases your time, your money, and your emotional investment. And like any addict, they'll continue the behavior as long as it continues to provide the desired outcome. The danger of connecting yourself to this archetype extends beyond the immediate resource drain. Their chaos has a gravitational field. When you entangle yourself with someone who operates in constant crisis mode, their emergencies begin to dictate your schedule. Their poor decisions start creating consequences in your life. Their conflicts with others begin to involve you. Their inability to plan ahead begins to disrupt your carefully constructed stability. You find yourself constantly in reactive mode, unable to pursue your own goals because you're perpetually responding to their latest catastrophe. The psychological toll is even more severe. Living adjacent to chaos creates chronic stress. Your nervous system never fully relaxes because you're always anticipating the next emergency. Your decision-making becomes compromised because you're operating from a state of perpetual crisis management rather than strategic planning. And here's the part that will disturb you. They need the chaos more than they need the solution. If you actually solved their problems permanently, they would lose their primary method of obtaining attention and avoiding responsibility. So subconsciously, and sometimes consciously, they will sabotage every genuine solution you offer, the job you help them secure, They'll find reasons it's unsuitable and quit within weeks. The budget you help them create, they'll ignore it and create new debt. The boundaries you help them establish, they'll violate them and blame external circumstances. You cannot stabilize someone who is addicted to instability, because stability would require them to confront the void they've been filling with drama. But there's an even more dangerous type waiting in the shadows. One who doesn't just drain you through incompetence, but through something far more calculated. And if you've ever felt confused about why your generosity was met with resentment, what comes next will finally make the pattern visible. The second archetype that will systematically destroy you operates through a mechanism that appears counterintuitive until you understand the darker aspects of human psychology. This is the individual who demands your help, consumes your resources, and then punishes you for providing exactly what they requested. They represent one of the most painful betrayals because they violate the basic social contract. Reciprocity. When you extend genuine assistance to someone in need, the natural expectation is gratitude, or at minimum, neutral acknowledgement. But this type responds to your generosity with something that shocks you: resentment, entitlement, and eventually hostility. The political strategist who studied power dynamics in Renaissance courts observed this pattern repeatedly. He noted that human beings have a complicated relationship with those who help them, particularly when that help is substantial and ongoing. Here's the mechanism. When you help someone significantly, you create an unequal dynamic. You become the provider, they become the dependent. And dependency, especially prolonged dependency, generates a toxic emotional cocktail in the recipient. First comes gratitude, genuine appreciation for your intervention. This phase feels good for both parties. You feel useful, they feel rescued. But if the pattern continues, if they require ongoing assistance, the gratitude begins to curdle. They start to feel diminished by needing you. Your strength becomes a mirror reflecting their weakness. Your capability highlights their inadequacy. Your generosity, rather than inspiring them to grow, begins to feel like a judgment on their inability to provide for themselves. And humans, by our nature, despise feeling inferior. We particularly despise feeling inferior to those close to us because proximity makes the comparison unavoidable. So a transformation occurs. They begin to reframe the narrative. Your help wasn't generosity, it was obligation. Your assistance wasn't kindness, it was something they deserved. The debt of gratitude becomes unbearable, so they psychologically erase it by convincing themselves that you didn't really sacrifice anything, that helping them somehow benefited you, that they're actually doing you a favor by accepting your help. This is cognitive rebalancing. They cannot tolerate the psychological weight of owing you, so they reconstruct reality until the debt disappears. And once the debt disappears in their mind, your continued help isn't appreciated, it's expected. If you delay, they're irritated. If you refuse, they're offended. If you suggest they should start managing independently, they're insulted. The next phase is even darker. They begin to speak poorly of you when you're not present. They minimize your contributions in conversations with others. They highlight any small mistake you've made while erasing the mountain of support you've provided. They may even paint themselves as victims of your help, suggesting that your generosity came with strings attached, that you held it over their head, that you made them feel small. None of this is conscious necessarily. It's a psychological defense mechanism designed to eliminate the unbearable feeling of indebtedness. By transforming you from benefactor to villain, they free themselves from gratitude's weight. If you're not genuinely good, then they don't genuinely owe you anything. If this interaction resonates with your experience, take a moment to share this perspective with someone who needs to hear it. The people who benefit most from this understanding are often struggling in silence, believing their situation is unique. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing so you don't miss the rest of this analysis. But the bottomless pit at least operates from weakness. The next type operates from malice. They're the ones who smile while sharpening the blade, who celebrate your failures while pretending to support your success. And identifying them requires understanding a truth about human nature that most people refuse to acknowledge. The third category represents perhaps the most insidious form of destruction because it wears the costume of friendship. This is the individual whose envy has become so consuming that they've dedicated themselves to your limitation. They don't attack you openly. That would reveal their true nature. Instead, they operate through subtle sabotage, through undermining disguised as concern, through poison wrapped in the language of protection. The Renaissance observer of power understood that envy is among the most destructive forces in human relationships because it's simultaneously invisible and omnipresent. The envious person doesn't hate you. They hate what you represent, the possibility they failed to actualize, the success they failed to achieve, the courage they failed to demonstrate. This archetype is often someone from your past who started at the same level as you. You were peers, equals, companions on the same journey. But then something diverged. You made different choices, developed different disciplines, took different risks, and those choices produced different results. You advanced, you grew, you succeeded, and they remained static. Now, if they possessed emotional maturity, they would feel inspired by your growth. They would study your methods, request your guidance, celebrate your wins. But emotional maturity is rare. More commonly, your success triggers a profound psychological crisis in them. Your achievement forces them to confront their own stagnation, and rather than using that discomfort as fuel for their own development, they channel it into a mission, reducing you back to their level. The tactics are subtle but consistent. When you share positive news, they respond with manufactured concern. You announce a promotion, they remind you that increased responsibility means decreased personal time. You share that you've met someone special. They caution you about moving too quickly, about patterns they've noticed in your relationship history. You reveal a new venture you're excited about. They list all the ways it could fail, all the people who've tried and didn't succeed, all the risks you apparently haven't considered. They frame all of this as friendship, as looking out for you, as preventing you from being hurt or disappointed. But the consistent theme is always the same. Don't rise, don't risk, don't shine. Stay safe, stay small. Stay within the boundaries of mediocrity where they reside. If you bring them along on your journey, hoping that proximity to success will inspire their own, you'll discover something disturbing. They will sabotage the process. Not necessarily through overt betrayal, though that can happen, but through constant friction. They'll create drama right before your important meetings. They'll question your judgment at moments when you need confidence. They'll leak your strategies to competitors, not necessarily with conscious malicious intent, but through innocent conversations where information happens to flow to the wrong people. They'll give you advice that sounds reasonable, but is actually designed to keep you from advancing. They'll discourage you from opportunities that would require you to leave them behind. The most painful aspect of this archetype is that they were often genuine friends before your success created the gap. The person who celebrated your small wins becomes the person who undermines your large ones. And you keep trying to revive the old friendship, keep trying to prove to them that your success doesn't diminish them, keep trying to bring them up to your level. But you cannot save someone from their own envy. Envy is a self-inflicted wound that only deepens when the envied person tries to help. Every gesture of generosity from you becomes further evidence of the gap between you, further fuel for their resentment. The only protection is distance and discretion. Share your struggles with them, never your victories. Show them the difficulties, never the triumphs. Or better yet, phase them out entirely and invest your emotional energy in people who have the security to celebrate your growth. The next archetype doesn't need to hide their weapon because they've convinced you that you're the one holding the knife. They've mastered the art of making their pain your responsibility, their weakness your burden, and their stagnation your fault. The fourth type of person who will consume your life represents one of the most psychologically complex challenges you'll face because they don't approach you with strength or aggression. They approach you with vulnerability. This is the individual who has weaponized their suffering, who has discovered that pain is power, that fragility is a form of control, and that helplessness is a manipulation strategy more effective than any overt demand. They are professionals in the art of victimhood, and they've built their entire identity on a foundation of trauma, dysfunction, and perpetual crisis. The challenge with this archetype is that legitimate suffering exists in the world. Real victims of circumstance deserve compassion and support, but this type isn't a victim of circumstance. They're an entrepreneur of suffering. They've learned to farm their pain, to cultivate it, to present it in ways that bypass your logical defenses and inject directly into your emotional center. Observe the pattern carefully. A genuine person in crisis wants to escape their situation. They're looking for tools, strategies, resources that will help them climb out of the pit. They implement the advice you give. They show progress, even if it's incremental. They express genuine gratitude not through empty words, but through changed behavior. The professional victim operates completely differently. They don't want solutions, they want sympathy. They don't want tools, they want an audience. They don't want to escape the pit, they want you to climb down into it with them, so they don't have to suffer alone. Every solution you offer is met with a reason why it won't work for them specifically. Every piece of advice is countered with an explanation for why their situation is uniquely impossible. Every resource you provide is returned unused with a story about how circumstances prevented implementation. Why do they behave this way? Because they've discovered that being broken has significant benefits. When you're the victim, you're never responsible. When you're suffering, people give you attention, resources, patience, and forgiveness. When you're fragile, expectations lower. You're not required to show up fully, to perform consistently, to meet obligations, to reciprocate in relationships. Your pain becomes a free pass, an excuse that explains away every failure, every broken promise, every unmet commitment. And if they actually healed, if they actually became functional and strong, they would lose all of these benefits. They would be expected to perform like everyone else. They would have to compete, to produce, to take responsibility. The identity of victim is comfortable because it removes agency, and removing agency removes blame. Here's where it becomes truly destructive for you. When you try to save this person, you enter a game where the rules are designed to ensure you lose. If you help them and they improve, they lose their identity. So subconsciously, they will resist improvement. They'll find new problems to replace old ones. They'll develop new symptoms to replace resolved ones. They'll create new crises to replace managed ones. The goal isn't wellness. The goal is maintaining the dynamic where they receive attention and support. You become exhausted. You pour endless energy into this person and see no meaningful change. You start to question yourself. Am I not helping correctly? Am I not caring enough? Am I abandoning them if I step back? This is the trap. They've made their dysfunction your responsibility and their stagnation your failure. And here's the truly dark turn. When you finally reach your breaking point and establish boundaries or distance yourself, they will transform. The helpless victim becomes vicious. They will paint you as the villain in their story. They'll tell everyone who will listen that you abandoned them in their darkest hour, that you were never really a friend, that you used them and discarded them when they became inconvenient. They need this narrative because it allows them to continue avoiding responsibility. If you're the bad guy, then their continued suffering isn't their fault. It's yours for leaving. Don't take the bait. Don't defend yourself. Don't try to prove you cared. The professional victim needs a villain to complete their story. And by trying to be their hero, you auditioned for that role. Before we continue to the final two types, if this analysis has shifted your perspective on relationships you've been struggling to understand, hit that like button. It helps others discover this information, and it signals that this type of psychological analysis has value for you. The next type will frustrate you in ways that none of the previous ones have because their weapon isn't chaos or envy or manufactured helplessness. Their weapon is their absolute, unshakable certainty that they're right, even as their life burns down around them. The fifth archetype is particularly maddening because the problem isn't that they don't know the path forward, it's that they refuse to acknowledge that a path exists beyond their own limited vision. This is the person imprisoned by their own arrogance, someone who has confused opinion with truth, who has mistaken stubbornness for strength, and who would rather maintain their ego than save their life. The Renaissance advisor to princes stated explicitly that a leader who lacks wisdom cannot be wisely counseled, meaning that you cannot teach someone who believes they've already mastered the subject. This applies beyond leadership to anyone who has fallen in love with their own perspective to such a degree that contrary information is perceived as a personal attack. You watch this person making catastrophically poor decisions repeatedly. They choose destructive romantic partners despite obvious red flags. They invest in transparently fraudulent schemes despite clear evidence of the scam. They start conflicts. They have no ability to win. They reject opportunities that would benefit them because accepting would require admitting they were wrong about their previous strategy. And you, because you care, because you can see the cliff they're walking toward, you try to intervene. You present data, you share research, you offer your own experience as evidence, you connect them with experts. And how do they respond? With defensiveness, with hostility, with elaborate mental gymnastics designed to prove that reality isn't real and their flawed perception is actually sophisticated wisdom that you're too limited to understand. This is ego protection at its most pathological. They've built their identity on being right, on being smart, on having things figured out. To admit they've been wrong, especially about something significant, would require them to deconstruct that identity. And most people lack the courage for that level of self-examination. So instead, they double down. They construct increasingly elaborate justifications for their position. They seek out information that confirms their bias while dismissing information that challenges it. They surround themselves with people who validate their perspective while cutting off those who question it. The echo chamber reinforces the delusion until they're completely disconnected from reality. Here's why you need to abandon this type immediately. You cannot use logic to extract someone from a position they didn't use logic to enter. Their stance isn't based on rational analysis, it's based on ego protection. And the ego will defend itself against truth more viciously than it defends against lies, because lies don't threaten the self-concept. When you present them with truth, you're not offering help, you're offering a threat. You're threatening the story they've told themselves about who they are. So they perceive you as the enemy. They attack your credibility, your intelligence, your motives. They'll drag you into circular arguments that go nowhere, conversations that repeat the same points endlessly without resolution. They'll exhaust you with debate, drain your energy with defense of the indefensible. And the most devastating part, when they finally hit the inevitable wall, when reality delivers the consequences you warned them about, they will not learn. They will not reflect. They will not come to you with humility and say you were right. Instead, they'll find external factors to blame. The economy, the timing, other people, bad luck, anything except their own judgment. And then they'll make the same type of mistake again, because the lesson was never absorbed. The arrogant fool is unteachable, not because they lack intelligence, but because they lack humility. And without humility, wisdom cannot enter. Your only move is silence. Don't argue, don't debate, don't attempt to convince. Simply step back and let reality deliver the lesson. Reality is a brutal but effective teacher. It doesn't argue, it simply presents consequences. Save your wisdom for those who approach you with open hands and open minds, who say, "I don't know, help me understand." Those are the ones worth your investment. And now we arrive at the final and most heartbreaking category, the person you've forgiven 1,000 times, the one whose betrayals you've excused, the one who has taught you that loyalty is a one-way street. What comes next will force you to confront the most painful truth about human nature. The sixth and final archetype represents the ultimate test of your ability to choose self-preservation over sentimentality. This is the person whose very nature is to harm, whose behavior pattern is so consistent that predicting their next betrayal is simply a matter of waiting. There's an ancient parable about a scorpion who asks a frog for passage across a river. The frog refuses, explaining that the scorpion will sting and cause them both to drown. The scorpion argues that such action would be illogical, since it would result in mutual destruction. The frog, convinced by this reasoning, agrees. Halfway across, the scorpion stings. As they both sink, the frog asks why. The scorpion responds simply, "It is my nature." This is the person you must recognize and release. The one whose pattern of betrayal isn't circumstantial but fundamental. They've hurt you before. They've lied to your face, stolen from you, betrayed your trust, violated your boundaries, cheated, manipulated, exploited your kindness. And each time, they returned with tears, with promises, with explanations that almost made sense. They swear they've changed. They describe the therapy they're attending, the spiritual awakening they've experienced, the moment of clarity that transformed them. They look you in the eyes with such apparent sincerity that you want to believe. You want to believe in redemption, in second chances, in the power of love to transform even the most damaged soul. So you open the door again. You let them back into your life. You give them access to your trust, your resources, your vulnerability. And the cycle repeats. The political observer from Renaissance Italy understood something about human nature that modern psychology has confirmed. Behavior is the most reliable predictor of future behavior. Character isn't a decision, it's a pattern. Betrayal isn't a mistake, it's a habit. When someone shows you who they are through consistent action, believe them. Don't believe their words. Don't believe their tears. Don't believe their promises. Believe their pattern. The person who has betrayed others will betray you. The person who has lied repeatedly will lie again. The person who has exploited every previous relationship will exploit yours. This isn't pessimism. This is probability. Here's the mechanism you need to understand. Every time you take them back after they've harmed you, you're not demonstrating forgiveness. You're conducting training. You're teaching them that there are no permanent consequences for betraying you. You're showing them that if they perform the right emotional ritual, crying and promising and explaining, they can reset the relationship and regain access. This doesn't inspire change. It enables continuation. They learn that your boundaries are negotiable, that your words don't match your actions, that you'll always cave if they apply enough pressure, and their respect for you, which may have been minimal to begin with, completely erodes. How can they respect someone who treats themselves so poorly? How can they value someone who has no standards for how they deserve to be treated? There's another layer to this that's even more painful. Your forgiveness isn't actually about them, it's about you. You're not taking them back because they've genuinely changed. You're taking them back because letting go feels like failure. You've invested so much time, so much energy, so much hope into this person. To walk away would mean admitting that investment was wasted, that you misjudged their character, that you can't fix everyone. So you stay, not out of love, but out of sunk cost fallacy. You're trying to rescue your investment rather than accepting the loss. But this is the gambler's trap. You've lost the money you put in. Putting in more won't recover what's gone, it will just increase the total loss. The solution with this archetype is complete amputation. Not reduction, not boundaries, not friendship from a distance. Complete severance. Delete the contact. Block the number. Remove them from all social media. Don't respond to messages. Don't accept meetings. Don't allow mutual friends to relay information. This seems harsh, and it will feel excruciating, like cutting off your own limb. But that limb is gangrenous. If you leave it attached, the infection reaches your heart and you die. The scorpion cannot be saved. It can only be avoided. Accept their nature. Release the fantasy of who you wished they were. Grieve the relationship that never actually existed. And move forward into a life where your loyalty is reserved for those who have demonstrated they're worthy of it. Now you've seen all six: the chaos generator, the entitled consumer, the envious saboteur, the professional victim, the arrogant fool, and the scorpion. You recognize them now. You see them in your phone contacts, at your family gatherings, in your workplace, and you feel the weight of what comes next. Because to follow this path means making choices that will make you look bad in the eyes of those who don't understand power dynamics. You'll be called selfish, cold, unforgiving. Let them talk. What they call selfishness, the wise call self-preservation. What they call coldness, the wise call clarity. You're not abandoning people. You're reclaiming your energy for those who will actually use it to grow. You're not being cruel. You're being strategic. You're not giving up on humanity. You're investing in the humans who have demonstrated they're worth the investment. The transformation you must undergo is from savior to sovereign. The savior burns themselves to light fires for others, sacrificing until they're nothing but ash. The sovereign builds a lighthouse. They stand tall, they shine light, but they don't jump into the waves. Those who want to be saved swim toward the light. Those who want to drown will drown in the dark, but the lighthouse remains. This is the ultimate wisdom. You're not responsible for the souls of others. You're responsible for the integrity of your own vessel. When you stop trying to save the unsavable, something extraordinary happens. Your energy returns. Your finances stabilize. Your health improves. Your mind clears. Your anxiety vanishes. And in that space of peace, you finally have the resources to help those who truly deserve it, the ones who take your advice and implement it, the ones who grow when you water them, the ones who return loyalty and reciprocate respect. That is genuine power. Not the power to endure suffering, but the power to choose who is worthy of your finite time on this planet. Let the world see a calm, untouched surface. Let them think what they wish, but know deep within that you've mastered the hardest art, the art of letting go. But remember, once the parasites are removed, once you're alone with yourself, you'll face the final mirror, and you might discover that the person you were trying to save all along was a projection of the wounded part of yourself you haven't healed. But that's a shadow for another time. If this opened your eyes to patterns you've been denying, understand that this is only what can be shared publicly. There are dimensions of psychology, manipulation, and power dynamics that cannot be discussed openly without algorithmic suppression.